Hello, friends. It's Thursday, January 11th, and this is your Chapo. On today's show, we take a look at the ongoing breakdown in the consent manufacturing factory from someone working on the inside. We're joined today by the author of We've Got People and the newly released The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution, Ryan Grimm. Ryan, welcome back to the show.
Lovely to be here.
Ryan, there's obviously a ton of stuff to talk about, and I do want to get to the case being presented at the IJC by South Africa regarding Israel and Palestine and the charge of genocide. And I want to get into just a lot of the ongoing issues about how the media is covering this conflict. But I want to begin, I guess, just sort of on a human level, because Ryan, I watch all the clips of you and others at these State Department press briefings asking questions that I'd like to see somebody answer. Ryan, my question is just, how do you do it? And how do you maintain your composure in the face of some of these answers that you get to these questions?
I guess it's I've been in DC for so long at this point that the stuff just kind of washes over me sometimes. The only one I ever kind of thought about, I was like, what am I even doing here, was an interview that I had with Ted Cruz a month or two ago. That one, I was like, this is just, and at one point he said, I got him to say, I condemn nothing Israel does, or even suggests it will do. This is after I'd asked him if he would condemn the guy who said let's nuke Gaza, who was even condemned by the Netanyahu government. And it's at that point, it's well, what is my point even here? If there's nothing that I can get out of you, then what is even the point? With the State Department, at least they might say something that rattles some cages somewhere, and then some ambassador calls them, and you never know what's going to shake loose from the State Department. So that kind of keeps me going there. But yeah, it's not easy.
I mean, we've talked before about State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. He seems to be sort of the star of a lot of these. And Ryan, it's you. I've seen the journalist Saeed Arikat, Max Blumenthal, and others are asking very pointed questions of these representatives of the U.S. government, for which there is no answer to. There is no way that they can answer these questions honestly. And I guess I was just sort of flavor of what's it like to be in that room, and just, I don't know, sort of have to professionally withstand their utter contempt for humanity.
It is so weird, because that there are American values that they have to pretend to stand for, the Pakistan stuff, and also the Israel-Palestine stuff has been some of the most difficult to absorb in that sense, because when it comes to Pakistan, for instance, they just keep repeating this mantra that they're supportive of free and fair elections.
And I mean, could you give some? Sorry, Ryan, could you just give some background on that? Because one of your recent clips was essentially you getting a representative of the State Department to basically say we don't need free and fair elections in Pakistan. Could you give us some background on that specific issue?
He accidentally said, "We will continue to support democratic suppression."
But it feels like election rigging of this level would merit sanctions. If a Maduro-like government did something like this, it would seem like the State Department might come down a little harder. This is 250 million person democracy.
And we will continue to support democratic suppression and vibrant democracy in Pakistan, but I don't have anything to preview from here.
Pakistan, and the AP reporter followed up immediately. You just said that you support democratic suppression in Pakistan. He's like, no, I meant expression, democratic expression, which is funny because democratic expression, that's not even a phrase. What does that even mean? But the funniest part, of course, is that the U.S., organized the overthrow of Imran Khan back in 2022. They pushed him out of office, and we obtained and published the document that showed the State Department official basically directing the government of Pakistan, the military of Pakistan, to go ahead and push Imran Khan out with a vote of no confidence. And if they do, quote, all will be forgiven. And if you don't, it will be a very tough road ahead. It was very clear, mafia language that was used. They push him out. He's now in jail. When candidates are going to file for office, they get arrested, literally just straight up get arrested, rank and file down ballot candidates. And so it's kind of enjoyable isn't the word, but it's nice to be able to put that stuff before him. Because when I asked about that one, I was following up from a Pakistani reporter earlier. I wasn't planning on asking about that, but a Pakistani reporter asked a question about the elections, kind of got blown off. And I'm like, well, okay, but wait a minute. Let's talk about the fact that they're like arresting everybody. Wouldn't you sanction Venezuela if they were doing this? Like, aren't you sanctioning Venezuela for doing less? And, putting that discrepancy in front of them and making them handle it is the only thing you can kind of get out of it. Like, just putting the hypocrisy on raw display.
Well, when it comes to putting hypocrisy on raw display, I mean, I'm struck right now by, like I said, the attempts to deal with this the criminal case of intention to commit genocide going on at the International Court of Justice right now, where South Africa has presented a case that look, the case will probably take years to decide, but like the case is about like their intent to commit genocide, not that they've already done one, but the crucial part is that the ruling that can be made immediately would be a request for them to cease all military operations until they can figure this out, or like the clear genocidal intent has been signaled. Our State Department and government and media have gone into overdrive to just state over and over again that this case is meritless. Ryan, I'm wondering, like, if you can think of other examples in your career as a journalist in which the sort of the efforts to keep the ship of state and the ship of propaganda going, like, have become so strenuous on behalf of the Western media and the governments that they sort of collude with, I suppose, in this case. Like, can you think of another example of like a breakdown this bad in the consensus manufacturing machine? Because the one I think of is the Iraq War, where it seemed like everyone got on board with the idea that Saddam has WMDs. But the difference is the public believed that at the time it was going on. It took years for that consensus to fall apart. What do you make of this current effort in which like that's the same mechanisms are being used, but they just aren't working?
Yeah, the Iraq War is the only one that I can think of, but you're right. That's the difference. This is unique in that way. And the press is, at least the press in this press room in the State Department, is starting to kind of move on it a little bit. One of the more satisfying questions I got to ask Miller was, do you guys at the State Department feel like you have exposure to war crimes charges? Like, have you been briefed? Are you concerned? Those are the fun questions to ask, because there isn't really a very good answer to that.
Is there any concern within the State Department that State Department officials could be roped into this prosecution?
No, I will say that as it relates to the State Department, we have been committed to addressing the humanitarian situation in Gaza and have made a priority of preventing, as I just said in response to your question, the displacement of Palestinians. I will also say, though, that genocide is, of course, a heinous atrocity, one of the most heinous atrocities that any individual can commit. Those are allegations that should not be made lightly, and as it pertains to the United States, we are not seeing any acts that constitute genocide.
And what he said actually shook loose some news and shook loose a bunch of follow-up questions. He said, we've determined that there are no acts of genocide going on. He also interestingly said, we have pushed very hard for the Israelis to let humanitarian aid into Gaza. In other words, even if they're doing something, like, we've pushed them to like not kill as many people, which there's daylight between him and John Kirby on that. Kirby is like, there's no red lines, and it's offensive and baseless that they're even, bringing these charges. So that's also fun to try to find, discrepancies between the State Department and the White House. But then the rest of the State Department press corps starts saying, wait a minute, you determined that there's no genocide? Because now there's a story for them. There's a process story, and they love process stories. They're like, that means if you've determined something, there were meetings, there was data gathered, there were things gathered, there were people who were in these meetings, and people took positions, and you came to a determination. And he's like, well, I don't want to get into any internal processes right here.
Right.
Like, okay, but you just said that you did determine. So what? And so now the press corps is pushing on that. At least say, like, if you haven't yet, like, why not? You were able to determine within like a few hours that Russia was committing genocide against Ukrainians. Why is it so difficult to come up with something here?
Well, Ryan, this gets into my favorite deflection of any accusation of genocide or war crimes against the state of Israel. And let's be honest here, against the United States of America, because we are like the unspoken party in the dock at the ICJ right now is the United States government. And the answer, the phrase that I've heard repeated over and over again by either by representatives of the State Department or the UK Foreign Office is, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Like, and these are people whose job it is to like adjudicate or like at least like deal in the realm of international law. And they're all claiming to, I'm not an expert on international relations. I'm not an expert in international law. I'm not a lawyer. I would need to understand this, blah, blah, blah. In light of the example you just said about how like no one needs to have a fucking degree in the law to look at Russia's invasion of Ukraine and be like, that's wrong. Or killing all these innocent civilians is tantamount to a war crime. And with this, they absolutely can't do it. And I'm Ryan, I'm wondering, did you watch any of the South African presentation of their case at the ICJ today?
I did. Somebody was pointing out to me that it basically was a completely like globally legitimate gray zone live stream. Like,
yeah.
Like there would be no daylight between the two, because there was this one clip where one of the South African attorneys is just for like 20 straight minutes.
20 minutes,
reading quotes. And he's like, let me tell you who this is from: the prime minister, the president, the head of the army, national security minister, and on and on and on. It's. I can't wait to see the rebuttal from Israel tomorrow, because imagine having that job.
Yeah. And no, I would highly recommend, if anyone hasn't seen even just clips from it. I mean, it is, if even someone who's watched this every day for 3 months now, it is stunning to see it all assembled in such a way. And I'm struck by like the sort of the flailing reactions to this really demonstrate the difference between presenting a moral, political, and strategic case in a media forum versus a courtroom. Because in a courtroom, they really can't control the narrative. And the way they're controlling the narrative is that I'm not going to see any of this on any TV channel in the United States.
Well, Belichick got fired, so...
Yeah. I mean, no. I spent all last night watching Stephen A. Smith's takedown of Jason Whitlock. I don't have time for the South African genocide case today.
I've had enough of that fat bastard.
But Ryan, I'm curious if you saw, you're saying like you're looking forward to see how they're going to refute it tomorrow. But I'm wondering if you saw the New York Times's coverage of this case today on the front page by Isabel Kirshner and John Elegant.
Did not read their piece yet. What was their take?
I mean, what was fascinating about it is, as you mentioned, like 20 minutes of this court presentation was just reading statements from Israeli government officials that are, inducements to commit genocide, announcements of intent to raise Gaza to the earth and everyone inside of it. The way this was described in the New York Times is South Africa filed an 84-page application to the court in December, laying out its claims and citing statements by Israeli officials, which it says constitute clear and direct public incitement to genocide, which has gone unchecked and unpunished. Israelis have pointed out that some of the evidence South Africa cites is slim. Among the examples is a comment made in a television interview by Israeli pop star Eyal Golan, who said Israel should erase Gaza. That is the only example that they cite from from the court case. That's the only example. And then most of the rest of the article it talks about October 7th and strongly implies that South Africa is doing this as a cat's paw of Russia.
And so if that's where you're getting your news, which a lot of people are getting their news from the New York Times, you come away from this thinking this is just another anti-Semitic smear job against the state of Israel. They're rolling up pop stars here to try to make their case. And yeah, exactly. It's like a cat's paw for Russia. Or you also see all kinds of semi-veiled racism. Fetterman saying like South African, just sit this one out. Not even sure what the implication there was, but you see a bunch of people talking
referring
about crime rates.
What he claims is the genocide of white South African farmers.
Oh God.
Yeah, that one was confusing because in the first clip that I saw that there's a lot of, if you were subtitling it, it would be 50% inaudible. There would be a lot of that. But he did eventually get around to, accusing them of doing white genocide, which really makes you wonder what Giselle is letting him do on his baby tablet.
I thought for a second he still thought apartheid South Africa was in power. And then
that was what I thought too. That was, yeah.
Like, okay, that's legit. Apartheid South Africa should sit this one out.
Well, it's interesting. Like if these are the reactions in English to South Africa's case, which run the gamut from South Africa is Hamas to South Africa is poisoning and defaming the legacy of the great Nelson Mandela by doing this to Israel. However, if you search in Hebrew on Twitter right now for the term South Africa or International Court of Justice, you will see that their reaction to that, which is mostly just calling them monkeys who fell out of trees.
And some suggestions that maybe they should go to war.
Yeah.
I've seen some of that too. Yeah.
Yeah. If not South Africa, then Holland, I guess.
Yes.
But I mean, I guess like also, I just as like as a member of the media and someone who does this professionally and observes it, I mean, like I'm wondering the ways in which like the horror of this conflict is managed by the media in terms of the language that they use. And I'm wondering if you can comment on the ways in which like Israeli deaths or October 7th is repeatedly referred to as a horror, a massacre, a slaughter, and then like Palestinians being killed in far, far greater numbers is sort of like a blast occurs, or the trajectory of a bullet interceded with the skull of an elderly woman. Like, I mean, just like can you talk about like the sort of the perception management in which the media does to sort of contain the horror of this conflict and direct it to only one side?
It's hard to describe, but it feels like you're doing something subversive anytime you apply universal principles in these press rooms. Like it feels like you've crossed lines. Now you haven't crossed lines, and the reason I keep, I'm still a reporter in good standing and allowed into these rooms is like I'm using the polite language, but I'm using language that is normally used to describe, say, Hamas, like you said. But I'm using it to describe either what the United States is doing or one of the United States client states, Israel, somebody else, doing very similar violent things. And so you can't like openly complain that you're being unfair by describing using the same words for these various different things that are the same, just done by different people. But there is this ineffable feeling in the room that like there's something different and subversive about doing that like that's outside the lines of how we talk about this. If I were like a graduate student, I would, or if there's a graduate student out there listening, go do a paper, like go look at the number of times October 7th was described as brutal. Like that, just look for that one word, brutal. And I bet you would find it in like 90%. Like it's become the word that you use to describe it. And then look at the number of times it's used to describe the Israeli bombing campaign or the incursion there. And I can't imagine the New York Times describing like the Israeli bombing campaign as brutal. Like it's just impossible to imagine, but it is also like just definitionally the most obvious word you could use for dropping a 2,000-pound bomb in a densely populated civilian neighborhood.
It's also a question of, and we see this particularly with Representative Tlaib, it's a question of who is biased about this conflict. And specifically, Rashida Tlaib's family lives in the West Bank, which she cannot even visit even as a sitting U.S. congressperson. Whenever she speaks with passion about the solidarity with Palestine or the freedom of the Palestinian people, I think like even people who are not directly attacking her for being like a Hamas sympathizer or terrorist adjacent will sort of talk about it in terms that like, well, she's too close to this issue. And I just want to make a point that the New York Times article that I just referenced, written by Isabel Kirshner, who has a byline, she's in their Jerusalem bureau. She's married to a man named Hirsch Goodman, who is the senior research associate at the Jaffa Center for Strategic Studies at Tel Aviv University, where he directs the Bronfman Program on Information Strategy. This is a guy with deep ties to the Israeli government and military who just manages PR for them. And look, I'm not saying like just because someone's spouse or the job they do makes you unobjective in how you cover this lawyer. But I mean, look, the proof is in the pudding. Look at the article I just read you. And just like the credence which we give people who are have very close personal ties to the state of Israel, the ability to objectively cover a conflict of which Israel is the main party to.
And a Palestinian civil society organization or quasi-governmental organization of a similar stature, even setting aside Hamas, let's say it's in the orbit of the PA, would probably be listed as a terror organization. And then anybody, related to a person who worked for them would then be designated as completely off limits.
I mean, I do want to get into the book because it has a lot of interesting things that are very relevant to what's going on right now in terms of how the Democratic Party attempted to kind of embrace with one arm and discipline with other the squad and and the hopes that they embodied as far as the Democratic Party go. But like the last thing I want to talk about, at least as regards to Israel and the media, is the repeated invocation of when they are finally pressed to a point where there's no other way for them to weasel out of it by saying, I'm not an expert, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to comment on ongoing things or hypothetical situations, is the staggering death toll of Palestinian civilians. And when backed into a corner to force to acknowledge it in any way, shape, or form, representatives of the United States government will always lean on this notion of human shields to explain away the shocking number of civilians who have been killed in this war. And I'm just wondering, like, the way in which that is always just accepted, or like we just sort of like, that's a fact, we move on from it. Like, has there ever been any real reporting on whether Hamas does indeed use thousands of people as human shields in hospitals and schools?
Well, a human shield also only works if it deters your attacker from attacking you.
Right.
If you're like in a 7-Eleven and you grab like a hostage, and the police come in and you know that they just do not care and they're going to blow you away, that human shield is not actually a shield. Like, their flesh and bones will get shredded just like yours, and you'll die. And so I think once Israel made it abundantly clear in this attack that they were not going to be remotely deterred attacking an area based on civilian population being there. Very early on, remember, they killed they claimed to have killed some very junior level Hamas commander in that refugee camp in which they dropped the 2,000-pound bomb and left this like just gaping crater. Like, they knew that there were civilians there everywhere. And so if you know that there are civilians there and it doesn't remotely deter your willingness to attack, they're not actually shields. Now, I think it's true that Hamas lives in it operates inside Gaza, has a vast tunnel system, and moves around a lot underneath that tunnel system. The IDF has a policy they call mowing the grass, where every couple of years they come in there and bomb as much kind of Hamas infrastructure as they possibly can. So it'd kind of be an odd choice to just build it immediately right outside in some farmland, I guess.
I mean, another like horrifying factor of this conflict is that it stands unique among, I think, in the history of war, in terms of how many journalists have been killed in the process of, I mean, like, not just killed, but like assassinated by the Israeli government.
Yeah.
It's over 100 now of mostly Arab journalists covering Gaza. Has this sunk in among your colleagues in the American media or Western press? Because I mean, like, if these were Ukrainian journalists being killed in the same numbers, their faces would be all over Time magazine. They would be people. They would be the heroes of the millennium.
Right. Yes. Oh, can you imagine if, well, for one, Ukraine is like 10, 20 times bigger than Gaza. But imagine if Russians had killed 100, 200, 300 Ukrainian journalists. Yeah, they would have canceled the Pulitzers and not just given them like a special commendation like they did, but given them all of them. And I'd support Pulitzer's just canceling itself and just giving all the Pulitzers to Gaza journalists. But it has sunk in among colleagues in the sense of like regular journalists who are covering this or other things, either at the State Department or the Hill or elsewhere. Like, they see that, but there's a real sense of kind of powerlessness that rank and file journalists have about what they can say. A lot of them, I'm lucky in the sense that there's no, I'm not held by any social media policies or anything else. Most journalists can't just kind of say what they think about something, and there's no interest higher up in newsrooms in pushing on this. Now you have seen organized efforts to get to sign letters and by journalists calling on to kill fewer Palestinian journalists, please. But those have not come from like the top. Like you have not seen the heads of the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal get together and go to Biden. Like, this is something that they know how to do. Like, if they care, like they will get the president on the phone, and the publishers and the editors in chief will all go to the White House, and they will let them know that they care about X issue here, and they will get that meeting. They haven't. I doubt they even considered asking for it.
it's really something.
It's dark.
Sorry, it's a brutal transition here, but like what I was struck about, like by reading your book, which is the story of like the emergence of the squad, sort of like following up on your last book about like how they sort of like the money raising and the political movement that brought them into power. This is sort of about the story of like largely through AOC of like what it's been actually like to be in office. But here's the thing. I said it's a story of like the Democratic Party embracing with one arm and disciplining with another. But the thing that struck me about this book, which was written, I assume long before October 7th happened, we're seeing here like I think like a demonstration of the fact that it seems in the Democratic Party or in Washington in general, the issue of Israel-Palestine is really like the fulcrum around which all power and like the disciplining of the exercise of power is exercised. By that, I mean like you can be a like fairly left wing on a lot of issues as a Democrat, and you will not be called, you'll not be called to the front of the class in the same way as if you speak out about Palestine. Conversely, you can be extremely right wing on many issues in the Democratic Party, and as long as you toe the consensus on Israel-Palestine, you are a member in good standing. Could you speak to that and like some of the examples in your book of how the Israel lobby views the squad and their attempts through Democratic Party leadership and then organizations like Democratic Majority for Israel to discipline this, what they regard as sort of like a restive wing of the party?
Yeah, that's really well put. And when I finished the book, I thought people are going to think I'm crazy for how much I focused on the Israel lobby here on the way that you said it well, that everything tends to end up revolving around that, because it seems crazy. Like none of these candidates, including Rashida Tlaib, ran on Israel-Palestine as their main issue. Rashida Tlaib, environmental justice, all of them, the Bernie Sanders agenda. Like that's generally what animated them. I spent a lot of time on the 2018 race where AOC stumbles for the first time in a major interview, and it's because she gets hit with this Israel-Palestine question. And at the end of it, she literally just taps out of the interview, and she says, "I'm not a geopolitical expert."
There we go.
Yeah, but it was interesting. It wasn't as a way of like she has like an agenda that she's trying to conceal. She's just like, you can see in her face through the interview that she thinks she might have touched some third rails, but isn't sure. And she just says, like, growing up, I didn't know a lot about this issue. In Puerto Rican neighborhoods in the Bronx, this isn't something that we talk about. Summer Lee told me almost
except for Richie Torres' district. It's all they talk about there.
Richie Torres' district is different. Yeah, it's a very different district. And so Summer Lee said the exact same thing about Pittsburgh. And so Waleed Shahid told me, he often would get asked, like, why does Justice Democrats, he's one of the founders of Justice Democrats, why do you guys focus so much on Israel-Palestine? And he's like, we don't. Like, it wasn't even like a litmus test issue for the most part when they were recruiting candidates. It's that the issue finds them. Like the same month that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar are sworn in, that's when Democratic Majority for Israel gets launched in explicit like response to the rise of those two in particular. AOC somewhat because she had talked about innocent unarmed people getting killed in Gaza, and that was scary. Like that this popular celebrity incoming freshman is like saying nice things about Palestinians, but it was mostly Tlaib and Omar, and it was spun out of AIPAC basically. AIPAC allowed dues that you paid to DMFI, money you gave to DMFI, to count as like AIPAC dues. Like, if you go to like the AIPAC conference, depending on how much money you've given over the years, you get better perks at the conference. You get some backbench, meeting with a bunch of Democrats. If you've given 100,000 or whatever, $1 million might get you a photo with Chuck Schumer or something like that. And so they would allow donations that went to DMFI to count, so you can get toward your like Schumer photo. And this was run by Mark Mellman, who, and this is where it gets interesting. Not only was he the guy who ran AIPAC's like anti-Iran deal project, which brought Netanyahu, over to the House to brief, to give this like joint congressional address against the wishes of the sitting president against the Iran deal. But he was also his client was Yair Lapid, who over the course of this book becomes foreign minister, and at some point he becomes prime minister of Israel. He's the head of the Yesh Atid party. And he told me the reason he's going after the Squad in such aggressive terms is this bank shot strategy. He would say Netanyahu uses the far left in the United States to
Yes, I was just going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yes. To like fearmonger over in Israel. And so he has to like crush the left in America to crush the right over in Israel, which say what you want about the strategy.
But is Melman an Israeli citizen? I'm sorry. Like, what other issue do political parties and the people who are sort of like empowered to enact an agenda do this level of 4D chess, where they're like, oh, we actually have to empower the right wing in this country, even though I'm a Democrat, because our real goal is to disempower the right wing in another country, which is Israel.
It's wild, and it only really works if the two countries are basically like the same, like, because you can't imagine that strategy being deployed with like Ghana. Like,
yeah,
you know, Ghana, politics in Ghana is probably
or like other countries with right wing governments like Hungary. Like I have to vote for Trump in this upcoming election because I'm really concerned about Viktor Orban's Hungary.
Yeah, and I'm going to support Orban because I'm so mad about AOC. Like,
right?
It's like, you can only imagine that with Israel, and I think that's also how Melman can say that publicly. And nobody at the Department of Justice is like, oh, wait, you just said that your American political work here in the country was for the purpose of your client over in another country. Like, if you're a lawyer at the Department of Justice and you're like, by the way, do you see this quote here where he said that his work here in the United States is on behalf of a foreign government and he's not registered as a foreign agent? If you tried to bring that up at the DOJ, you'd like, that'd be the end of your career. Like, what are you talking about? What are you suggesting here? Get out of here.
So like the book deals a lot with Pelosi and like, I mean, sorry, not with Pelosi, but with AOC, and then like also Pelosi's relationship with the Squad. How would you characterize Pelosi and her relationship with the Squad and then individual members between them?
Well, she was really good at a divide and conquer strategy. Like, she ended up forging this like shockingly close relationship with Ilhan Omar, while having like this intense animosity for AOC. And I think some of this, a lot of it was kind of legacy related for her when she came in to leadership back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. She was like the big win for the progressive wing of the party. Like, and so her identity has always been wrapped around the fact that, you know, she's from San Francisco and she represents like progressive values inside the Democratic Party, even though she won from the right in her primary in San Francisco. But that was always her legacy, and she would always tell AOC and the rest of them, like, you know, I've got Medicare for all signs in my basement that are older than you. So there was a real sense of like wounded pride, and like, who do these new people think they are? There's also some real MSNBC brain going on. Like, I write about this lunch that she and her chief of staff had, the first lunch they had with Pelosi, and Pelosi's like, you know, this abolish ICE thing, this is definitely from Russia. Like, this is injected into our political discourse by Russia, and we've got to do something about that. And it's like, and both, you know, she and her chief of staff were like, well, okay, wow, this is an interesting level of political analysis that we're at, because you get into the room where you're with one of the most powerful people in the world, and you hear that, it's kind of like, oh, yikes.
What shocking disrespect to Big Sean McElway.
I know. I got to ask Sean. Well, actually, maybe I'll ask him. Did the Russians give you that?
Yeah.
It was Russian crypto dudes.
Well, in that famous picture with him and Kirsten Gillibrand, there's like the head of Gazprom is in the background.
Aha.
Gold in that picture.
That might be the moment they injected it right there into the political discourse.
I do like the idea that Pelosi just like, she knew that wasn't from Russia, that it was from Sean McElway, and just didn't like him.
Yeah, I'm not giving that guy credit for this.
Yeah,
his relentless hashtagging.
Ryan, I was talking before we started got started recording, but in your last book, when one of the F times we had you on, a good chunk of it was dedicated to the antics of one Josh Gottheimer. And lo and behold, this book has quite a few Gottheimer anecdotes as well. But like, how would you describe Josh Gottheimer? Like, first of all, remind our listeners who he is, and like, how did he become appointed as like the Democratic Party's official attack dog against their own left wing and their own like representatives like AOC and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and others?
Yeah, I feel bad that there's so much in the book about him, because now he's going to be vindicated in his paranoia. Like every month or so, I will run into somebody in Washington, and they'll be like, "Dude, I was just talking to Josh Gottheimer, and he brought you up out of nowhere and went on like a 15-minute tirade about you and said that you're just obsessed with him, and it's outrageous." And I'm like, I haven't thought about this guy in so long, but now he's going to read the book and be like, "See, I knew it. I earned these 3 chapters." But yes, the last time I was on here, that was really kind of the introduction of this new character, and boy, has he panned out. He's a Mark Penn protege who was Mark Penn's intern in the Clinton administration. Mark Penn, one of the most, like, in an odious town, like one of the most odious people that's ever.
He was the one who ran the white working class campaign against Barack Obama. He was the one behind all the foreign Muslim stuff. And you go on to include a very funny part of the book where after Obama becomes president, Josh Gottheimer publishes a book about Obama's most inspirational speeches.
Like, if you want to make the Pod Save bros like sputtering with rage, just mention Josh Gottheimer, because they all assumed when they were back on the Obama campaign that Gottheimer was the hatchet man that was doing Mark Penn's. Like, Mark Penn would come up with the ideas, and then Gottheimer would be the one that would execute it. That's how the Obama campaign understood it. And this is like passing around photos of him in African garb, the Jeremiah Wright. He wrote Mark Penn wrote a memo saying we need to own the idea of being American. Like, this, like, really, really, really bad stuff. Jesus and so then, yes, Christ. Gottheimer publishes a book where he takes all of Obama's speeches and just writes an introduction and calls it like it's incredible. My editor has Bookscan and was able to look it up. And the good news is that it sold like hilariously close to 0 copies. But the book still is the most appalling thing that the Pod Save crew, I think, has ever seen.
Well, there are 2 stories about Gottheimer that I want to talk about. The first one, sort of like relevant to discussion about how people are sort of like disciplined into towing the line on Israel, is the story about how when Rashida Tlaib was first elected, she agreed to have lunch with Josh Gottheimer, who then proceeded to like read her the riot act. He brought out a binder. She was like, "Oh, hey, good to see you. Nice to meet you. I hope we can work together." He just brings out a huge binder, slaps it on the table, and begins like pulling her press clippings about all the anti-Semitic evil things she said. And then like you quote her in the book being like, "Geez, like I thought I was supposed to work together with people." I mean, it's just sort of like, and just like the contempt to the idea that a Palestinian woman could be like shaken from her position or from her moral and like quite practical stand about her own family.
And the poignant part is how much grace, she gives her colleagues. Like, she shows up to this meeting with this guy who's been saying the most virulent, anti-Palestinian things for years. And she genuinely believes that she can reach him on a human level. She shows up and she immediately, she said she started with a joke that fell flat. I think Netanyahu had just recently again like poo-pooed the 2-state solution, and she's like, "How's that 2-state solution going, Josh?"
It's and just stone face,
stone face,
just crickets. Tough crowd.
And then she tries to talk about her grandmother, like thinking she can reach him on this personal level. Everybody's got a grandmother, and just absolutely nowhere. And the white binder just comes out. And she said like a bunch of the quotes weren't even hers. I can only imagine maybe there's some Tamika Mallory or Linda Sarsour stuff thrown in there as well. Her being held responsible for everything anybody has ever said, that she's ever been in a room with. And yeah, she walked out of that meeting, and Omar told me like she called her and she could tell she's crying, and she's like, "If Josh tries to meet with you, like just don't do it. Like, it's just absolutely not worth doing it. And then Josh Gottenheimer spends the first like 6 months of 2019 trying to get her and Omar censured on the House floor. Like watching Rashida Tlaib get censured again after October 7th, after having kind of re-reported the first half of 2019, where they just ran this midterms in 2018 against Donald Trump and all the moral travesties that they're going to fight back against. And the amount of floor time and the amount of kind of cable news time that was dedicated to the question of, are you going to denounce your colleague for whether or not she's an anti-Semite, either Tlaib or Omar, was shocking to kind of realize like the extent of.
I mean, like the book is in a lot of ways like a repeated portrait of perhaps how unprepared for how Washington works, or just like the spinning blades that these women ran into. And I got to say, at least from my perspective, it doesn't provide the most flattering portrayal of AOC either. That's from my perspective, particularly her quote about Elizabeth Warren, which we can get into later.
Oh.
But like, my question is like, despite how popular, because AOC's like her seat seems to be a lot more secure than, for instance, Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib's seat is right now. If the Democrats could primary her and get rid of AOC, would they do that?
Oh, I think they would, because she has an outside base of power, and no matter what she does with it day to day, that's a threat. Like that alone is a threat. Like just the very idea that there's somebody out there who could, if they decided to, kind of do something different, like can get media attention, can move the needle, and among different subgroups. That's a problem, and the fact that she inspires other people to challenge incumbent Democrats and create space for that conversation. They would just rather that didn't exist, no matter what no matter how much she tries to assure them that she really is like in it to like beat the Republicans with the Democratic Party. Like they don't want to hear it.
Well, I mean, if they can't primary her, like another strategy is the creation of their own version of AOC, which like I regard as Richie Torres. The young guy, person of color, gay, but is like he's the congressperson from Tel Aviv. Like he's the staunchest defender of Israel and the Democratic Party. And you have an amazing line here about how he basically compares Israel to his sexual orientation.
Oh God, yeah.
And like, I mean, but just like the ways in which they understand that like whether she's effective as a legislator or one thing or is one issue. And I think she's been pretty much neutralized, as is like the Squad, Bernie, all of them. But the thing is, like, she still is a face and a voice that represents something of a figurehead for the left wing of opinion in the Democratic Party. So in order to counter that, I think they can't just have, Pelosi or Joe Crowley before. They can't just trot them out. So they need someone who's young and a person of color who can like counter the identity check marks that AOC has, but give voice to like the Likud party. Like where does Richie Torres come from, and how does he figure into all of this?
He's got just such an incredible story. And he's also he's brilliant. Like he's got to be like just IQ wise has to be like one of the smartest, if not the smartest, like members of Congress. He's also talked openly about like mental health challenges, like manic depressive stuff. There was this wild moment where he's in a manic phase where his staff couldn't reach him, and he wrote a column saying that Andrew Cuomo was like the second coming of LBJ, and just sent it to the New York Post, and they published it like the next day. And his staff was like, "Oh God, Richie, come on, man."
Is there anyone in Congress who's like neuro driving on a straight line? We could.
That's a very good question. Probably in the 70s, a lot of them, but they're drunk all the time. But worked. Richie.
It all went downhill after Tung Sung Park. He kept them all in line.
Yeah, when they banned smoking. Richie grew up in public housing in the Bronx. Gay Afro-Latino guy, elected I think at early 20s to like New York City Council. Just guy on the move, and he linked up very quickly with both AIPAC and also then crypto money, which is a weird kind of detour that the book has to take because of how much crypto money then flowed into the Democratic Party. But he was the nexus of both of those, Sam Bankman-Fried and the rest of the crypto dudes and AIPAC money. In that audio that I obtained that you talked about, he's speaking to DMFI, and there's this the things that the DMFI donors are saying about him are just so gross. Like, we wish we could clone you. We need a million Richie Torreses. And then he goes into his thing. And if people have been trying to figure out how it is that he compared his sexuality to Zionism, it was that it's so dangerous in the United States to be pro-Israel that that supporters of Israel have to be in the closet.
Right.
Just like LGBTQ people in this country. And so that's why he has this strong affinity for the state of Israel.
Yeah, who could forget all those homeless children that are just forced into shelters because their parents find a David Ben-Gurion poster in their room when they're 15.
I'm really undermining my case that he's brilliant. But you just have to kind of take my word for it there.
Well, look, I mean, like he figured out where like the real nexus of power is if you want to go a long way in the Democratic Party, despite having no constituency or likability.
Yeah, he's doing good.
Oh, sorry, I skipped over the second Josh Gottenheimer anecdote, which is that he wore. Okay, could you set the scene? Josh, shall we say, chose to go the extra mile in protecting himself when being in a room with potential constituents in Paterson, New Jersey.
Yes,
could you just relay that story?
Yeah. So Bill Pascrell is just like he's turning 80. He's probably been in office almost all of his 80 years in New Jersey, and he invites Gottheimer as a freshman to his 80th birthday party, which is going to be at Duffy's, which is in Paterson, New Jersey, kind of a New Jersey dive bar, and Gottheimer represents Northern New Jersey. Like he's up there with the insurance folks, the pharmaceutical hedge fund, private executive folks. He's not down in Paterson, New Jersey. But this is the dean of the New Jersey delegation. You can't say no. It's his 80th birthday. He shows up with a bodyguard and a bulletproof vest on underneath his shirt.
Oh my God.
And he's already kind of jacked. Like he works out.
So people damn, Josh, you're looking pretty brolic today. What did you you're hitting the gym? And it's like, oh no, this is just a level 4 ballistics plating I have on to go to the dive bar.
Yeah, Josh Gottheimer has sort of like a beefier Mikey Miles build. He's like one of those. He's very short, but he has one of those bodies like short legs and shit where it's beneficial for deadlifts and stuff. Very jealous
and
of that.
He likes to put videos on social media of him doing like pull-ups and push-ups and stuff. So people immediately are like, bro, are you wearing a bulletproof vest? And they're just razzing him about it for a while. And then eventually Duffy, who is like a freeholder. So like, this is like, he's a local elected official, and it's the congressman's birthday party. It's probably not going to be that dangerous, but the
you never know.
Duffy himself comes over and he's like, get out of my bar. Like, you are an asshole. Like, get out. And so I went to the congressman whose birthday it was and asked him about it. And what I love about how people relate to Gottheimer is that he just told me the story on the record. He's like, yep, that happened. He's like, but I told Terry, I was like, the guy's an idiot, but he's going to be an idiot whether you throw him out or not. What's it going to prove by throwing him out? Like, let's just leave him around here, and who's he going to hurt? And so they ended up letting Gottheimer stay at the 80th birthday party.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can never be too safe,
Yeah, that's true. You never know. Yeah, what if he ended up being the only guy that survived the Duffy's shooting? Like, wouldn't we all look like idiots?
Gottheimer should start wearing those suits that they give John Wick that are just regular suits, but they're bulletproof. Yeah,
and that was all just his beef.
Yeah. I guess another story that you relate in the book that I think was kind of a turning point, for which like a certain segment of former AOC supporters or like the left kind of soured on her, was her present vote for the Iron Dome funding. And this goes back to Israel, and and like, how distressed she was over that vote, and like the back and forth with her. Could you relay like the AOC Iron Dome funding, and like, and just like the push and pull there in AOC's own, I don't know, like her own internal political and moral calculus on that vote?
Yes, and the fun little backstory on that is that Yair Lapid, Mark Mellman's client, was foreign minister at the time, and literally got on the phone with Steny Hoyer to like demand the vote. Like that's how that vote happened. Is Hoyer, Yair Lapid later told the Israeli press this, but Hoyer also directly said that to Bowman and to Omar, who, when they were calling for him to, can you just delay this vote? Let's think about this. And he's like, no, I promised Israel. Like this is like this vote is happening. And so going in, there's like 9 or 10 people who are going to vote no on this thing, and it's totally symbolic. Like the $1 billion number is just made up. That was twice as much as the Iron Dome had spent in its like entire existence. It still has never gone through the Senate. It wasn't like intended to like actually get to Israel, just to make a point. And so, yeah, AOC goes on the floor and she votes no. And then she comes into the cloakroom and she sees Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and they can tell that she's like, in feelings about it. And she's like, look, I don't think I can go through with this. Like, and basically the argument she was making was she wanted to be a peacemaker back in her district. She wanted to be able to bridge the two sides here. And she's like, I can't. I got to go change my vote. And Omar tells her, like, Alex, do whatever you want. Just don't go out there and cry. And Rashida's like, oh, Ilhan, stop telling people not to cry. Come on. What are you doing? She's got to cry. She's got to cry. And she goes out there.
I got to agree with Omar there. I mean, politics is like baseball. Like, I don't want to see any tears from any elected representative.
Yeah. And so she went out there and did not take Omar's advice. And what Pelosi told her, like, people always wondered what Pelosi told her that, like, kind of triggered it. And all Pelosi said was just that, she said basically, Hoyer wanted this vote. I didn't want this vote. Just vote your conscience. And then she switched to present, and she then later put out a statement like explaining that point, that like she felt like if she didn't vote present, she wouldn't be welcome like in the local Jewish community, and then wouldn't be able to kind of bring people together. Which I write it, I think in that passage or somewhere around it, that's like one of her central contradictions, that she wants to be both the like leader of a political revolution, but also wants to be a consensus builder. And no human can like be both of those things.
I mean, especially not like, and it's like, AOC has been, has AOC become out in favor of a ceasefire? Yeah, she has, right?
Yeah, very early.
Okay,
yeah.
I'm not saying like AOC is like Richie Torres. It's just like, I guess like my frustration with her as a political figure is I keep having to ask myself, it's like her seat is secure. Like, haven't you realized by now that these people aren't going to let you do anything? So like I just don't get what benefit like there is to her continuing to try to curry favor or be a consensus builder with these people.
That was the fight that she was always having with Corbin Trent, her communications director, and another founder of Justice Democrats, who got pushed out halfway through the first year, and he would make that exact point to her. He said that you can't get small enough for them to be okay with you. Like they hate you. They hate you for how you got here. You took out Joe Crowley. They hate you for what you represent. They will always hate you for that. You have a massive power base out there that you can deploy in your service. They hate you for that. But there's no amount of, like exactly like you said, there's no amount of charm that's going to get them to accept you into their club. Like it's not happening.
Yeah, with AOC, in the first like year after she was sworn in, I very generously sort of thought that the problem was, especially after I don't know if you remember when she met with like it was 4 goofy constituents who supported the coup in Bolivia. I that it was a very embarrassing thing. But I generously thought, okay, maybe she has this problem that a lot of people in this very nascent new American left have, where anytime someone who's ostensibly on their side, even if they're just cynical operators, they feel like they immediately have to respond to criticism. And I thought, okay, in the best case scenario, that's the problem here. years on, I don't know that I would say that she's like fully a, horrible, cynical operator 100% of the way. But I think we could safely say it's beyond just an oversensitivity. There's, the regular amount of ass covering you would see in any U.S. rep, which is, I mean, not an exoneration because her entire reason to be was that she wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think that she was kind of miscast for the role. Like, and she talks about that a little bit in the book. That like, in some ways, there was a marriage of convenience between kind of Justice Democrats, the left, and her campaign. Like, she had no other path at the time. Like, New York politics just completely shuts you out, especially if you have progressive inclinations, which she did. She went to. I think she decided to run like while she was out at Standing Rock, and so she has progressive like values, and there's just no path in New York City for that, and so the only path was as this like burn down the house insurgent, but that really wasn't kind of who she felt she was. Like she was willing to, occupy Nancy Pelosi's office, probably one of the most impactful things she's done in her career, which really took the Green New Deal from obscurity to kind of on the global map, but felt ambivalent about it, the entire time. There are some, whereas somebody like an Omar leans in a little more to the conflict and is more comfortable in the conflict, and some of it I think just does come down to that.
I mean, like I that kind of makes her sound worse because it's like, well, like, I'm sorry, but like you don't have to be a politician. That's not something you need to do. This isn't like I mean, it's not like you're breaking into like acting or something and you've been typecast. Like you went out there, and I remember in her first campaign, like she was very explicit about things like Israel Palestine. She, used a very specific set of language to describe her positions. And it's like, I mean, okay, if this was the only way for her to get in, well, like, okay, I'm sorry, but
right, that's like, not a
that's the fucking
ad,
that's the fucking job.
The example from the book that I think like best illustrates like the split in like how people conceive of AOC or how she conceives of herself as like a progressive versus what I would regard as like progressive, socialist, Democrat, liberal, or whatever. There's what you call yourself, and like then like do you represent an agenda? Did you run an agenda? And do you have the sand to see that agenda through? And I think like the quote here from the book that I think illustrates where her head at is on this is when she talks about the fact that she was worried that Bernie's supporters, and look, you can take, there's a fair amount of self-motivated reasoning here. So please, like, I'm indebted by this. So like, take this with a grain of salt. But she says here, speaking of Bernie supporters, it's frustrating to feel like they are hurting him, she said at the time. I feel like Warren is scooping up LGBT progressives, women, and progressives of color because of how they isolate. And I got to say, AOC, if she ever actually believed that Elizabeth Warren was scooping up anyone, I'm sorry, I got no confidence in your ability to deal with Washington.
It also shows like how wild those presidential campaigns were. There's that moment where Warren, I think it was like maybe a 36-hour period where she's like leading the race, and Bernie is like in the hospital, almost dead. Now this is before that, but Bernie was struggling, and it was
AOC speaking at his rally in Queens saved him to a large degree. I was there.
Yeah, it did, and then Rashida and Omar getting in, shortly after that. That was they brought him, back from the dead, like from 10-15% to, on the brink of winning the nomination, and that was also part of the reason that she and the rest of the squad spent some of 2019 being less kind of firebrand than they might have otherwise been, because they were trying to like assure the like resistance Dem MSNBC watchers that Bernie would be a safe choice for them. Like, don't worry, Bernie's not going to hurt you. We're all on the same team together. But yeah, what she's seeing there, well, Warren has, she's very good. Warren's very good at what Bernie's not good at, like Bernie says, I'm not calling you on your birthday. Warren's going to call you all the time. Also, Warren picked up a lot of the support at the top. If you remember, a lot of the leaders of like DC based progressive organizations were all kind of Warren supporters, while their kind of staff and what grassroots base they might have had were Bernie supporters. So she's seeing some of that at the same time. She's also constantly marinating in anger from her colleagues about either quote unquote Bernie bros or her own staff, who she was allowing a super long leash that first year to just like lambast the speaker and other members of Congress by name. So she's feeling all the heat for that and then reflecting it back.
I mean, I guess like what I take away from this is not that like, she's a terrible person or what a joke or we were all con, but like I just lack the confidence in like anyone who wants to claim the standard for like not even a socialist agenda, but just a basically progressive or social democratic agenda in Washington, D.C. You cannot do that and not be willing to make enemies of the Democratic Party and the media that supports them. Like there's no two ways about it. And to go even further, now post October 7th, you can't even make a stand for the basic principles of humanity without making enemies of the Democratic Party and the sort of New York Times liberal media establishment. And like, if those are your values and you want someone to uphold those values, like I don't think you can have confidence in them if they continue to try to like, I don't know, like work within the system or play nice with, MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, and the entire leadership of the Democratic Party. I guess that's what I took away from your book.
No, yeah, and post October 7th is going to force this question in an interesting way, because you're going to have 2024 AIPAC, coming at probably not AOC, because they probably can't get a candidate that's viable. Probably not Presley, but everybody else, they're coming for, plus anybody who's ever kind of said anything nice about them in the past. I write about how they went after Andy Levin, pro-labor congressman in Michigan, and a former synagogue president, because he was supportive of, he would defend Rashida Tlaib sometimes, and they're like, we can't have that. He's former synagogue president. That's too much credibility. We need to get. So they wipe him out. They're going to expand.
And they just announced about $100 million that they're going to throw at the squad this upcoming election.
An enormous amount of money. Because they did spend $5 to $7 million against like innocuous progressives. Like, you remember Donna Edwards? Like when she was in the House, she voted against Israel in one vote in like 2008 around that war, and they have hated her since then. So she came back. She was trying to run for her old seat. She was up 50 points with a couple of months left to go, and they dropped $7 million against her, which nobody's ever seen like $7 million spent in like a House race. So it's not hard to get to $100 million spending at that amount. But that's also then going to force all of those members of Congress to like join together. Like they have to realize at this point that they hang together or they hang separately.
And how would you rate the chances of some of those seats being turned over by this effort? I would say pretty good at this point, right? Very high.
I think Jamal Bowman is vulnerable to redistricting, which means, his fate is somewhat in the hands of New York Democratic leadership, which is not how you want to be.
Yeah, he's
Jamal Bowman.
Yeah.
Cori Bush is facing Wesley Bell, who's a progressive kind of prosecutor. I think he had like Soros money when he first ran, and when he saw how much AIPAC opposition there was going to be to Cori Bush, he dropped out of his Senate race, jumped into the House race, and has been talking about our special relationship with Israel. They have not managed to find anybody credible, despite dangling $20 million in front of two different people against Rashida Tlaib. Omar's at risk, but right now she has two candidates opposing her, which is good for an incumbent because it splits the vote. We'll see if they can sort that out. Summer Lee, they're definitely gunning for her. And we'll see if they come for even Max Frost, who's a character in the book, but has been critical of Israel since getting elected. So I assume that they're regretting kind of giving him a pass.
I guess like, you know, and I fully expect them to be successful electorally with the amount of money that they spend and like the media on their side. I suspect that they're going to get some of these scalps. But my question is, what good is that going to do them in the long run? What good is that going to do them in the short term of just the 2024 presidential election? Because you can replace these representatives and you can like put the media into crank it into overdrive to support Joe Biden and pretend that we're doing anything other than supporting a genocide right now. But the thing is, public opinion on this, particularly among people under the age of 40 or 30 especially, is dramatic on this. And like, do they have any conception of how to deal with it, like of turning this ship around? Or is it just a matter of like, they don't really need to care about public opinion?
Well, for AIPAC, which is driving a lot of this, that's a feature, not a bug. Like that, this is mostly, you know, right-wing money at this point. Partisan Republican, a lot of partisan Republican money coming into these primaries. So if it also depresses turnout for Democrats, that's a bonus for them. But yeah, the Democratic Party looked like they had a coalition, you know, that was coming together because for the first time in forever, young people actually were liberal. Not just the media thought they were liberal, but they were actually voting in more progressive numbers than previous young generations. They seem like they're just willing to just totally squander that for what? Like for Netanyahu, a guy who wants to see Biden lose anyway. It's quite something.
I mean, from one perspective, you could be like, yeah, like they're willing to commit suicide on behalf of a right-wing party ruling a foreign country. But it's not really about Israel, right? I mean, it's about the United States of America. It's about our empire. It's about, does this country run the world or not? Because I think like that's really what's at stake here. Certainly with this, the genocide case in South Africa, however it gets decided one way or another, and it'll probably take years before there's any, you know, like definitive resolution here. But like it's unquestionable that the United States of America is on trial now in not just literally in a court, but in the court of public opinion. And it's hard to see, you know, I mean, like that I think is why we're going to like I said, to the Democratic Party as well, like is going to suicidal like lengths to enforce this consensus on Israel, because it's not really a consensus on Israel. It's a consensus on like, does the United States of America have the right and ability to rule the world?
And meanwhile, we might undermine our ability to rule the world. Like you can envision a scenario where we take our dominant position in the Middle East and somehow squander it, you know, as a result of this genocide case and what could flow out of that. If the Abraham Accords were our effort to like lock all this down, it's not looking so good for us.
All right. Ryan Grimm, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you for your time. The book is The Squad, AOC, and the Hope of a Political Revolution. Lots of really interesting stuff and anecdotes in that book that we didn't get a chance to discuss on today's show, but check out the book. And Ryan, thanks again for going to the State Department and,
I'll keep doing it.
Because, you know, like I'm screaming at my laptop, shut the fuck up, and just doing the jag-off motion until like, you know, my wrist breaks. But, you know, I'm glad someone is professional enough to like, you know, to sit there.
It's all we have left, but it's worth doing.
All right. Once again, Ryan Grimm, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, guys.